is the first event we do as a Colnaghi Foundation. I'm going to be very brief. It's just that Nicholas and me, we realized that nearly after 300 years, Colnaghi should be more than an art gallery. We think that this space has to be a platform where art can be, enjoyed by everyone. We need to get art close to society, and we need to engage the new generations. And I think that this is the best and the first way to start.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for that very kind and generous introduction, and good evening, everyone. Delighted to see you all here. We'd like to extend our thanks to Nicola Jennings for organizing the event, to Artes for the invitation, Colnaghi for hosting it, and also to Brindisa and the Instituto Cervantes. It's really a great pleasure to be here. As I look out into the audience, I see a lot of friends this evening, and I think that's what Artes does very well, is it brings together a group of friends who love Spanish art. And one friend I'm particularly pleased to see this evening is Gabriele, whom I don't see every day now that I work in the Northeast, but it's been my great privilege and real pleasure to assist him on the Ribera Drawings catalogue project. And one person we should not fail to mention who also worked with us is Elena Fenelmore from the Prado, and we were a good team, I think. And this picture was taken when we were in Cordoba in 2015, right before we started to really dive in headfirst to the project and work on Ribera. So I think a great place to start would be to ask Gabriele how he first became interested in Ribera and where it all began.
Thanks. Could I echo Ed's comments and thanks? And could I say, several of us, of course, want a piece of Ed. He's been a tremendous collaborator with me at the Prado, with Mark Roglan at the Meadows, and of course now at Auckland Castle. They're of course old friends here and so on. And of course you were for a while in New York at the Morgan. That's right. It's a fantastic experience you built up over the years, and I was able to take advantage of that as we worked together on the Ribera catalogue. Why don't you go to the next slide? We just thought that, nothing could be nicer than to be in conversation with Ed, and we just thought we'd very briefly relate where that spark of interest first arose in this rather astonishing artist. For me, it was in 1984 when there was that great Civiltà del Seicento exhibition in Naples, huge exhibition on Naples in the 17th century, from paintings to drawings to prints to gold work and textiles. It was absolutely astonishing exhibition. And this picture had been recently restored for that exhibition. Now, the amazing thing about this picture is it's painted on copper, and it's a picture which is more than 4 meters high. So if you ever get asked in a pub quiz, what's the biggest picture on copper? Well, this is probably the one. And it's completely astonishing that it should have been painted on copper. But clearly the deputies of the Chapel of San Gennaro were very keen that the works that were produced for the chapel should be of the very, very highest quality, should survive for all eternity, and should be commissioned from the very, very best artists. This is the first, I suppose, modern attempt at a catalogue of his drawings. It was an exhibition organised by Jonathan Brown. In the early 70s, I suppose there were about, 60 or 70 drawings known by him. That number has gone up now. We've catalogued nearly 170 drawings in the latest catalogue, raisonée. But this was a terribly important exhibition. It was done almost exclusively with loans from American museums. After all those caricatures that we inherited from the 19th century about Ribera tainting his brushes with the blood of all the sainted, and Ribera being this artist who enjoyed sort of walking around with the studio with his hands dripping with blood, having painted terrible martyrdom or torture scenes. So that's certainly a part of his activity, and one that I don't think should be remotely underestimated. But there's certainly much more to him, and I think that's one of the things that the exhibition that's currently on at the Prado tries to show. And then there was this exhibition that was held at the Kimball Museum that was organised by, known to many of us, Bill Jordan, who of course was the curator at the Kimball Museum at the time, and Craig Felton, who had attempted in 1971 the first catalogue raisonné of Ribera's entire painted oeuvre. This was the great 1992 show that was held in Madrid and in Naples and in New York. I first met Alfonso Pérez Sánchez, who was the sort of mythical director of the Prado at that time. When this exhibition was being prepared, I was a student in my first year of PhD research, and I thought this is a great opportunity to go and offer my services to the Prado. So I went as a very young man and presented myself in Alfonso Pérez Sánchez's office, and I said, you know, I come from England, I'm doing this PhD research on Ribera. You're doing this great Ribera show, could I help you? Alfonso said, esto lo hará el Prado. This will be done by the Prado. Goodbye. And that was my introduction to Alfonso Pérez Sánchez. Our relationship, I'm happy to say, only got better after that. And in fact, I was very, very fortunate because I thought, well, it hasn't worked with Alfonso. I'll go to Naples and I'll talk to Nicola Spinoza in Naples and I'll offer my services to Nicola. And I did the same thing in Naples. And Nicola said, but of course, we need you. Come and join the team, come and write for the catalogue and so on. That was a fantastic introduction. And of course, after that, Alfonso was pure joy. And inspirational joy to work with, I have to say. I did this little show at the Thyssen on the Pietà, and subsequently the Prado did a show on the young Ribera in 2011, by which time our understanding of the young Ribera had changed very, very dramatically. You might want to say something about that.
Absolutely. It's really his activity in Rome that came to light in this exhibition, which traveled from the Prado to Capodimonte in Naples. And our understanding of Ribera's Roman years were clouded for a long time. And then this exhibition brought to light some new discoveries, and we got to understand his period in Rome from now 1606, we would say, until about 1616, so a period of 10 years. And a very fertile period, but what's really interesting from the perspective of the drawings is that only one drawing can firmly be dated to that period. So we still need to do more work to unearth sheets which may have survived but have not yet been recognized. Ribera is born in Valencia in 1591. We know very little about his background. He was the son of a shoemaker. He is in Rome in 1606. This was recently discovered and published in the Burlington magazine about a year and a half ago, something like that. And then was briefly in Parma in 1610-11. And then in 1616 he moves to Naples, and he stays in Naples until his death in 1652. And in 1616 he's working for the viceroys of Naples. So he's working in a Spanish environment in Naples, and a lot of his works are being exported to Spain. So although he never returns to Spain, his works are really returning to Spain en masse and are being extraordinarily influential. It was a source of tremendous frustration to me that article was published, because I was working in the diocesan archives in Naples looking for the processo matrimoniale, it's called, the documentation relating to his marriage, because we know that he was married in 1616. He married the daughter of a Sicilian painter called Azzolino, and in this documentation it usually says, you know, how long he's been in Naples, that he's not been married before, who are his witnesses and so on. And I just couldn't find it. It just wasn't there. And then it's one of those documents that had been misplaced and was subsequently found by a friend of mine and published in the Burlington. I tried it first, but unfortunately didn't find it. But it does say this very interesting thing, which is that he's been in Rome. He had been in Rome, I think he says,
per imparare a pintare from 10 years earlier. So we work back from 1616 to 1606, and of course, as you know, that's a crucial date because that's when Caravaggio is still in Rome and is about to leave. So potentially there is an overlap. Although of course Ribera would have been very young, just 15 or 16 years old, but he's there right at the time when the sort of Caravaggio revolution is being manufactured. One of the ideas in the exhibition was to not make it exclusively a drawings exhibition, but very much to try and integrate the drawings into a broader view of his artistic production, so to include both prints and paintings. And in one instance, we also included a wax work, a wax sculpture by his father-in-law Azzolino, which I think seems to have some connection with what Ribera himself was doing. But we start at the beginning here with this drawing here. Like many drawings, it has an inscription identifying the author. So in some ways, it's a little bit surprising that in a sense we had to kind of completely rediscover Ribera as a draftsman, because so many of his drawings do have old inscriptions on them, and some of them even have signatures on them. We'll see one or two in a moment. This drawing was identified before the picture for which it's related, which we just saw in the slide, was identified. But if we just go back for a second, you'll see on the right the Osuna St. Peter penitent, commissioned by the Viceroy Duke of Osuna himself, and kept in the collegiate church in Osuna near Seville until he arrives in Naples. There is this big question. We've identified all these early paintings by him, but where are the drawings? This is a drawing that's in the Prado's collection. It was one of those drawings that was left over after the Spanish Civil War. Nobody claimed it. It's not known where it came from. But eventually, in 1971, it was accessioned in the Prado, sort of 30 years later, and was assumed to be preparatory for an unknown painting. Two things are interesting about it. One, I think, is the inscription down at the bottom right that says Solis. Solis will come across again in just a moment, but then if we compare it with the picture that I thought it was worth comparing with, potentially you have a preparatory drawing for one of these early Roman pictures, and this is the central figure, the soldier, in the center of the Corsini Gallery's penitence of St. Peter. So it's a speculative comparison. It's a comparison that it seems to me is perfectly workable, and also it's a drawing which I think one can see fitting in quite easily into the context of Roman drawing at the beginning of the 17th century, which is clearly where his drawing, I think, must have first developed.
Ribera's most common medium in drawing was pen and ink, but there is also a strong group of red chalk drawings by him. And this is really a touchstone sheet because it's the only drawing which is signed and dated by his hand. Got on the lower right, Jusepe de Ribera, 1626. And this was a real watershed year for Ribera because he made that beautiful St. Jerome painting we saw at the beginning, the drunken Silenus, another St. Jerome which is actually in the Hermitage. And this drawing.
I just want to say a word about this drawing here. This was a very famous Ribera drawing. It was included in the first ever attempt at listing drawings by Ribera in 1908 by August Meyer in the first monograph written on the artist. And he includes this drawing, which is at Christ Church in Oxford. The subject is very Riberesque. Clearly it's the St. Irene that we see so frequently in the Sebastian pictures, looking after the injured saint. She's holding a fragment of an arrow there in her left hand. And of course it has a signature on it. Well, what more could you want if you're looking for touchstone drawings? Certainly already Jonathan Brown had expressed some doubt as to whether this was by Ribera. It didn't look like his other red chalk drawings. And I always thought that the inscription looked very slightly stiff, a little bit forced. So I thought, well, let's look at other signatures by Ribera, particularly on the prints, and just see whether it might be a copy from a printed signature. And so we compared with the print of the drunken Silenus, and there it is down at the bottom. And if we compare the two things together, you can see, in fact, it's pretty clear that that is a copy of the signature on the print. I mean, you can compare letter for letter, and even the marks around the A, Joseph A. Ribera, the comma after the Joseph, the accent on the A, the F that he's taken down a line, but it's clearly a very, very careful copy of the signature on the print. So I argued in the catalogue, or we argued in the catalogue, that this was a later inscription, it wasn't to be considered a signature, and that it was placed on a drawing not by the hand of Ribera to make it appear that it was by Ribera. The really interesting thing that's emerged, and this is what's most pleasurable to observe once the catalogue has been published, that our colleague and friend Viviana Farina in Naples has identified in Apido, in the Marches, this painting, and quite clearly the drawing is in relation to this painting. You can see that the drawing is, I think, quite clearly preparatory for that figure there. A painting which is traditionally attributed to Mattia Preti, but I don't think that's the right attribution for it. It may even be by a northern Caravagesque painter, and that certainly was the proposal that we made when we discussed the Christchurch drawing, that it may well be by a drawing by a northern Caravagesque artist. So I think as we make further progress with the painting, we'll be clear on who the drawing is by as well. This is a drawing that was identified by the Christie's team when they went down to do some work on this strange collection down in Folkestone. And among them was this drawing attributed to, who was it attributed to? Franz Floris. But of course turns out to be a very spectacular, highly finished drawing on a subject that was very a favoured subject amongst Spaniards, not particularly common in Italy, and particularly favoured among Valencians. Very, very beautiful, highly finished drawing, and I imagine it's a commission drawing or a gift drawing, and potentially for a Valencian patron in Naples. There were lots of Valencians in Naples. Many of them were soldiers, but there were court administrators. There were members of the aristocracy who were in royal service at the viceregal court.
So this is a very finished drawing, perhaps a presentation drawing for a lost painting of Samson and Delilah. So Ribera worked in red chalk, but also red and black chalk together. It's quite painterly, very finished. This
drawing is quite important. Not only is it a very, very beautiful, highly finished drawing, but I think it says something about Ribera's relationship with the court in Madrid. Until a few years ago, we knew that in 1630 he had painted an adoration of the shepherds for the King of Spain. But I think his relationship with the court in Madrid probably can be pushed back probably to the mid-1620s, and potentially this drawing documents the first steps in that relationship, long-distance relationship between Ribera in Naples and the court in Madrid. Philip IV had recently become king in 1621, very, very passionate about painting and very interested in surrounding himself with fine paintings from the past, but also by contemporary masters. And as his reign progressed, it became clear that his favourite painters were Rubens, Velázquez, and Ribera. Now, Ribera is the only one of those three artists he never met. And in the mid-1620s, I think Ribera is sending over this drawing and another drawing of David and Goliath, which are presentation drawings to show the king what it is that he could do if he were commissioned to paint for the royal palace. The paintings were made from the descriptions, because the pictures are lost, from the inventory descriptions. They do look very much like the compositions we see in the drawings. And the very fact that the drawing from an early date was in the collection of Francisco de Solís. That's the hand of the inscription on the right-hand side of the drawing. We'll come back to Solís, I think, a little bit later on. He was a court painter to Mariana de Austria, Philip IV's second queen, and he seems to have had access to drawings that were available in the royal workshop. And I suspect that if Ribera sent these over to show what his paintings would have looked like if they were commissioned, then they would have stayed in Madrid, and Solís would have been able to get his hands on them.
St. Jerome we saw earlier in paint, and here on paper there are 5 drawings of St. Jerome by Ribera's hand. What's interesting about this sheet in the Prado collection is that he's reused the page for that kneeling figure at the very top. So he'd represent Jerome in various guises, penitent, scholar, and here he is in the desert. You see, this use of pen is actually really quite extraordinary here. The parallel hatching and these very characteristic passages that you get from the 1620s, where you've got a really large group of pen and ink drawings which survive. Another one, this St. Peter in the Met. You can see a very early stage in the preparatory process. There are 3 drawings of St. Peter by his hand. No paintings survive. And this is not really a compositional study, but a figure study of the recumbent male nude. And you can see he's not even completed the left arm there. But what he has done is he's practiced signing the J for Jusepe multiple times. And it's wonderful because here we get a glimpse of the private Ribera. We've caught him in this off-guard moment of doodling almost, and clearing his pen and turning those ink marks into designs. The E there at the bottom center, perhaps related to E for Espagnoletto. And also you've got at the bottom right a design which looks like a scorpion. So he's playing around on the page, and a signature there at the very bottom. So very few drawings are actually ones that survive signed by him, but you do encounter inscriptions. And this composition, which is in the Academia in Madrid, is a wonderful contrast with the Met sheet, because here he is working up the subject more. It is not just a figure study, it is a full compositional study with other figures. And the one thing that I really see when I look at this drawing is that it's about weight and physicality, lifting St. Peter up on the cross, and this device of the rope, which you can see traveling right through the slit in the wood there, being hoisted up, and figures in the background here. And you can just make out one figure in the bottom right-hand corner, but beautiful sheet worked up in wash.
It is interesting that Ribera, he does sign an awful lot of his paintings, and Ed, you were pointing out that he seems to sign pretty consistently from 1626. So 1626 does seem to be quite an important year for him. I've speculated that it may have something to do with him. He has his first child in 1626. In 1626, he's made a member of the Order of Christ. He becomes a knight of the Order of Christ in Rome. So it may be, it's difficult to know, but these things happen in people's lives, and they become tremendously important moments that they want to record or recognize. Anyway, from that moment, he does sign almost every picture he does, he signs. So you'll have seen he likes to do naked men. That seems to be a particular fascination of Ribera. And I think if you try and count through the catalogue raisonné, you'll find that about between a quarter and a third of his drawings are naked men tied to trees. This is a very curious obsession. And I don't know how significant it is, because I don't know actually how big the oeuvre is. But if we assume that to some extent what survived is representative of his oeuvre, it is very much a subject he is passionate about. It may be just to do, of course, with finding a subject that's suitable for experimenting with the naked figure in sometimes quite complex poses. But it, of course, it may reflect darker things that are very difficult to speculate on.
Here you can see he's experimenting with different moments in the story representing at the top the vulture as it approaches Titius and coming in closer to the figure further down. It's actually the next stage in the narrative which he represents in his paintings, although we can't quite determine whether or not this is preparatory for one of the paintings that survives, so perhaps a lost work. And this here is another reclining figure, and it's a very significant sheet because this is his only representation of the female nude which survives. And what I love about it is that it's a very quick sketch. You can see him working very quickly. It's very spirited. And you see along the bottom there, what's represented is actually bed sheet. But Jonathan Brown has wonderfully described that as like an electric current. The use of the pen there, it's very, very sharp and quick. And you've got the satyr pulling back the curtain, very similar to what we saw with that figure in the Samson and Delilah drawing, and little Cupid-like figure with an arrow in a suggestive position.
Here I'd like to say something about Walter Witztum. Maybe some of you met him. He was a German art historian and connoisseur who works on drawings, especially of the 17th century, and wrote very, very eloquently and extensively on Neapolitan drawings. And he was responsible for putting on some quite important exhibitions in the 1960s and 70s, where he was able really to give an account of drawing in Naples over the course of the 17th century. I think is still pretty valid for us today. And he identified this very important group of drawings in Rome, in the Istituto Centrale, which is a compact group of about 15 drawings or so, which all of which seem to date from the 1630s. They're connected with paintings from the mid-30s, and I suppose must have come as a sort of portfolio of drawings, probably from Ribera's own studio. They're all in this very sort of staccato Morse code style, and they're related, as I said, to paintings. Curiously, a lot of his drawings are not related to paintings at all, not strictly related to painting. So I think drawing for him was really a sort of independent, autonomous, speculative activity, and part of it was part of his preparation for paintings. But certainly his understanding of drawing was much broader. It was exploratory. It was instinctive. It was intimate and personal. And then, of course, you do have these instances of drawings. This is a tiny postage stamp drawing, which is preparatory for that huge Apollo and Mars, terrifying picture, which is in Capo di Monte in Naples and is in the exhibition. Real difficulty with placing the drawing, that's about the size of the painting on screen, but the drawing itself is about that big. So we had to find a way to make a sensible relationship, and I think by putting it at a 90-degree angle to the painting, you can sort of look at the drawing close by and then step back and see its relationship to the painting. But it's a very, very clear relationship between the drawing and the painting. In most cases, the relationship is certainly not that clear and not that evident.
This drawing of an Inquisition scene represents a form of torture known as the strappado, or the garrucha in Spanish. And so what would happen is that those who were accused of having committed a crime would be tied, their wrists behind their back, and then raised up on a hoist in order to draw out a confession. And so what you see here in the center of the sheet is a figure who's being tortured on the hoist, and he's under such duress, such pain, that he's actually defecating onto the ground. And so to the left of him, you've got the inquisitor holding pen and paper, and then a notary type figure there in the left-hand corner. And he did two such sheets. Another one is in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. But what's striking about it actually is how delicate it is as a drawing. It's beautifully executed in pen and ink and wash. So you've got this tension between the real beauty of the execution and the violence of the subject matter. This is another such drawing documenting a form of contemporary violence that he could have seen, a figure bound to a stake. What's interesting about it is that he's signed the sheet very clearly in the bottom left-hand corner, as if to say that he was there that he saw it, testimony of seeing this firsthand, quite similar to Goya in The Disasters of War, saying, "Je le vis," I saw it, and the marks at the bottom of the page seem to indicate pieces of wood, suggesting that this figure would eventually be burnt. A red chalk drawing in the Courtauld gallery shows another bound figure, but it's a drawing of a very different character. So related in medium and subject to that sheet we saw from the British Museum dated 1626, yet we can't identify who this figure is. Even that figure from the British Museum, we're not quite clear because of the iconography. So it's been suggested it could have been St. Bartholomew, but there's no knife. He's too old to be St. Sebastian. So it seems that it's not so important to Ribera about identifying the figure, but more about exploring the body in contorted positions. And he's included a figure at the bottom of the sheet defecating into a pot. It seems like a sort of strange juxtaposition, but actually, I wonder if he was inspired by the little figurines that were sometimes used in Neapolitan Spanish cribs, the cagané, these defecating figures. And there's even a proverb in Spanish which goes that dung is no saint, but where it falls, it works miracles. So one wonders if there's a kind of play going on in this drawing between the bound saintly figure and this young man defecating in a pot.
I think some of those torture drawings, you want him to be more sort of emotionally engaged, and he doesn't seem to be. He just seems to be observing and recording. It's sort of deadpan observation. You sometimes want him to be kind of more engaged, but these are things that he's seeing, that he's recording and jotting down very quickly in some cases, because the scene is moving in front of him.
Here he's represented the head of a man in profile, a pose that was typically used in caricature, and he's added things like warts, hair sprouting warts, and protruding bottom lip and oversized nose, and so he seems to be playing with what he sees as well. And here he really goes to town in this particular drawing, very spirited again, and very graphic and linear, pen and ink. And what I love about it is that you've got this incredible appendage, that nose there, figures with goiters as well. And he's used the reserve of the sheet in order to create this contrast with the pen, to give us that hood and the shadow versus the light. It's really quite extraordinary and very finished.
Ribera clearly has a concern with the teaching of drawing in Naples. Naples, famously, although the evidence is slightly later, artists were traditionally thought not to draw enough or not to draw as well as they did in Rome or in Florence. And so that may have been something that Ribera was conscious of and was anxious to play a part in improving. His drawing seems to have developed in Rome, in an academic ambiente, possibly close to the Cavaliere d'Arpino. We don't have any evidence, but his drawings seem to sort of emerge or come out of a very sort of highly developed academic style of drawing, to which then he contributes his own very spontaneous, particularly his pen and ink drawings. And this rather wonderful drawing at the Met, a very strange drawing. You have a bat sort of pinned to the wall. Between its claws is a scroll with an inscription in Latin, Fulget semper, virtus, virtue shines forever, and then two ears to left and right. Very difficult to make much sense of that, and I'm not sure anyone's come up with the proper interpretation. Very important is to recognise that the bat is the symbol associated with Valencia. So I think that may give us a first clue that there may be a sort of personal impresa aspect to this. He was extremely proud of his Valencian origins. He often signed himself, as Ed was saying before, Valentinus, Valenciano. So his geographical origins were terribly important to him. The ears, it's more difficult to understand. I wondered whether they might have something to do with, bats' use of echolocation and so on, but I realised that was really discovered much later on. But of course, ears are associated with hearing, obviously, but they're consequently also associated with fame, because fame comes through the ears. And I wonder whether there may not be a sort of personal impresa there about the artist really celebrating his own artistic achievement and his own fame. One of the paintings, the painted version of the Silenus, has a serpent tearing the cartellino with his name on it, as though his detractors or his enemies, his rivals, are scratching at his fame by wanting to tear his name in two. And I wonder whether this may have something. He was extremely proud of his artistic achievements. He was a very famous artist. I said at the beginning he never returned to Spain, but very recently some documents were identified which suggest that in the early 1640s he had been called to court. So he was going to go back to Madrid.
So this section, which is the penultimate room, focuses on subjects that Gabriele grouped together called In the City and In the Country. And one drawing in particular, this one here, which is in the Getty, represents these two figures, an Oriental nobleman and his page carrying a halberd. And you immediately notice that this different scale and this huge pole, this sort of comic element to it. But what's also interesting, on the bottom right-hand corners, we've got again these inscriptions in the same hand that we've seen before.
I think there's about 6 or 7 drawings that have these inscriptions. I think they're clearly by the same hand. They're all slightly different. Jusepe de Ribera, de mano de Jusepe de Ribera, Españolete, Ribera, el Españolete, Jusepe de Ribera. But I think they're all pretty clearly in the same sort of neat hand. It's very interesting that there should be such a group of drawings so early on in Madrid, potentially during the own artist's lifetime. So not only were his paintings being sent to Madrid, but drawings were also arriving in Madrid and being collected by Solis. Solis really is the only significant collector of the 17th century who we know in Spain had drawings by Ribera, and he's certainly an important collector in his own right. He's easy to identify because he puts his inscription on lots of drawings and often adds his own name. So I think there's a very interesting kind of further work to be done on the collecting of Ribera's drawings in Spain in the 17th century.
So 2 more drawings from this section. This one, a family of gypsies around a forge, is particularly striking. You've got this old man seated on the ground with the bellows, pumping that bellows into the fire, and you can see the smoke and the flame with that accent of wash, and the figure of a woman cradling a child, and these little children just reaching up. He captured these moments, groups of figures that he would have encountered in the street, and other such attractions, namely the acrobats, which is our cover image. And interestingly, it was the same image that Jonathan Brown chose for the cover of his catalogue back in 1973, so there's a nice echo there.
It's a live drawing, and he's working on what he's observing in front of him. He picks up this motif in one of the later torture drawings, which is this one here, where you get that same motif, but treated in a rather macabre fashion, where this acrobat is taking down somebody who's been hanged, who holds a cross in his hands, and then these sort of peasant observers who seem sort of unengaged by what they see, these little figures clambering up the trees. They are sort of mysterious, curious scenes. He loves this idea of sort of little figures clambering over larger forms and even larger figures. This picture here, this drawing here, for example, magnificent drawing where you have a figure dressed up with a mask, and then you have these smaller figures clambering over him as though they're trying to get to the summit of a mountain. This chap sort of balancing on his sword, and another sort of pulling on his nose, about to make his way up onto his hat. This is a print after a lost drawing. It's a print by Arthur Pond of a drawing that was in a London collection in the 18th century. Here the head has been turned into some sort of animal's head, possibly a sheep's head. but interestingly you have the defecating man on top. So, this is potentially a print after a lost drawing by Ribera, which was clearly in a British collection in the 18th century. And I just wanted to finish with this drawing here. I'd like Ed to say a few words about the show that he's planning in the Meadows. But this is the drawing that closes the exhibition, and I think is probably possibly the last drawing by Ribera. And I think it's a wonderfully beautiful, elegiac drawing. It's Ribera, his hand is already trembling. He seems unconcerned about scale and about proper relationship between the forms. I mean, the Virgin Mary, who he finally decides that this is the one he wants to keep. She's rather larger than most of the other figures. You've got an earlier version of her there, and another version of her there, which he's crossed out. So it's a drawing where he's very much. I see him as sort of very much caught up in his own thoughts, using the pen and the ink, and then putting on with the lightest of touches some wash to create this very, very beautiful, rather moving drawing, and possibly, as I said, one of the latest drawings, one of the last drawings he ever produced.
My job when working on the Meadows show has been to propose alternates in many cases, so we're very grateful to the lenders for offering us these sheets. So a sheet from the Courtauld from San Francisco, incredibly generous. And I love this drawing because you've got, again, Ribera gesturing towards caricature, although no drawing that survives by him we have classified as a caricature. This orator gesturing to someone beyond the page, and his left hand there almost hidden within the voluminous folds of the drapery. This really inspired the title of the exhibition, Between Heaven and Hell, and it was, again, a sheet that we saw on our visit to Cordoba, this beautiful drawing of the Archangel Michael triumphant over Satan. And this sheet coming from Toronto, I think really encapsulates that tension between the beauty of the execution, Ribera's drawings, and the horror and violence of some of the subjects. And it was our colleague Viviana Farina who described this sheet as Sebastian looking almost dancer-like at his hand posed above his head, which I thought was a very beautiful description. This sheet, to my knowledge, has never been exhibited in a Ribera show before. It's in a private collection in New York, and so it will develop this theme that we're going to be representing of men tied to trees. This sheet as well has never been shown in a Ribera exhibition before, and we actually didn't know where it was for a while, isn't that right, Gabriele? And now it turned up in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and they were incredibly generous when we asked them at the 11th hour if they wouldn't mind lending this drawing to the Meadows exhibition. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to present new research on these sheets. This drawing as well, here in London in the Wellcome Trust, preparatory for the print. As Gabriele said earlier, very few of the surviving drawings by Ribera are preparatory for known paintings and prints, so this is one of those few examples. And finally, we're going to be showing some more of these capricci, these incredible sheets of head and figure studies with little figures at the top. And I'm ending with this one. It's very intriguing. So you've got this cloaked man here and a little figure who's mounted the summit, and he's planting a flag on the top as if to indicate he's conquered the mountain. And on the flag itself is inscribed Niccolo Simonelli. And Niccolo Simonelli was an art dealer working in the orbit of Ribera. They may indeed have crossed paths. So one wonders about the function of the drawing, and even if Ribera was the one who added that particular inscription. So I think by way of conclusion, I want to thank Gabriele very much for this evening, because when we were originally invited to do this, I asked him what he wanted to do, and did he want me to interview him? And he said, no, I don't want to do an entrevista, I want to have a conversazione. And so I think it's been a wonderful conversation with you, and I've really taken great pleasure in collaborating with you on this project. So thank you. Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Congratulations.